Henry Blackwood was born in 1869 and wrote at least 10 original collections of short stories and 14 novels. He was fascinated by the outdoors and by the supernatural, and this is evidenced in today's ghost story from this prolific and celebrated author, which is entitled The Transfer. It's not about football.
The child began to cry in the early afternoon. I remember the hour, because I had been listening with secret relief to the sound of the departing carriage, those wheels fading into the distance down the gravel drive with Mrs. Freen and her daughter Gladys, to whom I was governess, meant for me some hours' welcome rest, and the June day was oppressively hot. Moreover, there was this excitement in the little country household that had told upon us all. Mr. Freen Senior, Uncle Frank, was expected for an unusual visit from town about tea-time. I also knew that his visit was concerned somehow with the future welfare of little Jamie, Gladys's 7-year-old brother. More than this, indeed, I never knew. I only gathered that the visit of Uncle Frank was of a condescending nature, that Jamie was told he must be upon his very best behaviour, to make a good impression, and that Jamie, who had never seen his uncle, dreaded him horribly already in advance. I recalled his white distress that morning when told that Uncle Frank was motoring down for tea, and that he was to be very nice indeed to him. "The man with the enormous face?" he had asked in a little voice of awe, and then gone speechless from the room in tears that no amount of soothing could calm. I feared for him. For all that commonplace household, I loved Jamie best, though professionally I had nothing to do with him. It seemed to me that no one understood him, least of all his honest, tender-hearted parents, so that his little wailing voice brought me from my bed to the window in a moment, like a call for help. The haze of June lay over that big garden like a blanket. I saw him down beyond the garden, standing in his white sailor suit, alone. He was down by the ugly patch, where nothing grew, the forbidden corner. Then Mr. Freen came into the garden, and Jamie turned and ran as though some spell had broken just in time, ran into the open arms of his fond but uncomprehending father. That treeless, flowerless spot stood at the far end of the magnificent rose garden, a bald, sore place where the black earth showed uglily in winter, almost like a piece of dangerous bog, and in summer baked and cracked with fissures. Behind it stood the thick wood of silver birches. The gardeners had a very simple explanation for its barrenness, that the water all drained off it, owing to the lie of the slopes immediately about it, holding no remnant to keep the soil alive. It was Jamie who felt its spell and haunted it, and for whom it was finally labelled strictly out of bounds because it stimulated his already big imagination. It was Jamie who buried ogres there, and heard it crying in an earthy voice, swore it shook its surface sometimes while he watched it, and secretly gave it food in the form of birds or mice or rabbits he found dead upon his wanderings. "It's bad, Miss Gould," he told me. "But, Jamie, nothing in nature is bad, exactly, only different from the rest sometimes. Then it's empty. It's not fed. It's dying because it can't get the food it wants. It's hungry, don't you see? But I know what would make it feel all right." I remember that I shrank from asking explanation. Mr. Freen Senior had been so frequently the subject of conversation in the family since I came. I had then read so much about him in the papers, his energy, his philanthropy, his success with everything he laid his hand to, that a picture of the man had grown complete within me. I knew him as he was, within, or as my sister would have said, clairvoyantly. For this Mr. Freen was a man who drooped alone, but grew vital in a crowd, because he used their vitality. He was a supreme, unconscious artist in the science of taking the fruits of others' work and living for his own advantage. Others fed him. In the man's immediate neighbourhood, you felt his presence draining you. He took your ideas, your strength, your very words, and later used them for his own benefit and aggrandizement. Not evilly, of course. The man was good enough. But you felt that he was dangerous, owing to the facile way he absorbed himself into all loose vitality that was to be had. He went about carrying these accumulations of the life of others. In this sense, his life was not really his own. For the same reason, I think, it was not so fully under his control as he imagined. I shall never forget the sensation of icy shrinking and distress with which I heard the rumble of the car. He had arrived. Tea was already on the lawn, and Mrs. Freen and Gladys, back from their drive, were sitting in wicker chairs. Mr. Freen Jr. was in the hall to meet his brother, but Jamie, as I learnt afterwards, had shown such hysterical alarm, offered such bold resistance, that it had been deemed wiser to keep him in his room. The instant I came upon the lawn, I hesitate to set it down, it sounds so foolish, disconnected. I could have sworn, as my eyes met his, that a kind of sudden darkness came, taking the summer brilliance out of everything. And it was caused by troops of small black horses that raced about us from his person to attack. After a first momentary approving glance, he took no further notice of me. The tea and talk went smoothly. Jamie was never mentioned. Outwardly, all seemed well, but inwardly, everything was awful, skirting the edge of things unspeakable. I watched his hard, bleak face. I noticed how thin he was, and the curious, oily brightness of his steady eyes. They did not glitter, but they drew you with a sort of soft, creamy shine like Eastern eyes. Before 5 minutes had passed, however, I was aware of one thing only. Separated merely by some dozen yards or so, this man, vibrating with the acquired vitality of others, stood within easy reach of that spot of yawning emptiness, waiting and eager to be filled. These two active centres were within fighting distance, he so thin, so hard, so keen, yet really spreading large with the loose surround of others' life he had appropriated, so practised and triumphant. That other, so patient, deep, with so mighty a draw of the whole earth behind it, and so obviously aware that its opportunity at last had come. The conflict would be hideously unequal. The first evidence he gave that something was going wrong with him was when his voice grew suddenly confused and his lips trembled a moment and turned flabby. The next second his face betrayed that singular and horrid change, growing somehow loose about the bones of the cheek and larger, so that I remembered Jamie's miserable phrase, "The emissaries of the two kingdoms, the human and the vegetable, had met." For the first time in his long career of battening on others, Mr. Freen Senior found himself pitted against a vaster kingdom than he knew, and, so finding, shook inwardly in that little part that was his definite actual self. He felt the huge disaster coming. "Yes, John," he was saying, in his drawling, self-congratulating voice. "Sir George gave me that car. Gave it to me as a present, wasn't it, John?" And then he broke off abruptly, stammered, drew breath, stood up and looked uneasily about him. "What's that?" he cried. "What's that horrid place? And someone's crying there. Who is it?" Before anyone could answer, he started across the lawn towards it. Before anyone could move, he stood upon the edge. He leaned over, peering down into it. Each side was intensely active, but only one side, the human, exerted all its force in resistance. The other merely stretched out a feeler, as it were, from its vast potential strength. No more was necessary. It was such a soft and easy victory. There was no bluster or great effort. Close by his side I witnessed it, for I, it seemed, alone had moved and followed him. No one else stirred, though Mrs. Freen clattered noisily with the cups, making some sudden impulsive gesture with her hands, and Gladys, I remember, gave a cry. It was like a little scream. Mother, it's the heat, isn't it? Mr. Freen, her father, was speechless, pale as ashes. But the instant I reached his side, it became clear what had drawn me there thus instinctively. Upon the other side, among the silver birches, stood little Jamie. He was watching. A liquid fear ran all over me. And then it happened. A truly wicked sight. I think he understood vaguely that if someone could only take his place, he might be saved. And that was why he saw the child and called aloud to him across the empty patch, "James, my boy, come here." I heard my own voice ring out, though I was not conscious of saying it. "Jamie, don't move. Stay where you are." But Jamie obeyed neither of us. Moving up nearer to the edge, he stood there, laughing. I heard that laughter, but could have sworn it did not come from him. The empty, yawning patch gave out that sound. Mr. Freen turned sideways, throwing up his arms. I saw his hard, bleak face grow somehow wider, spread through the air and downwards. A similar thing I saw was happening at the same time to his entire person, for it drew out into the atmosphere in a stream of movement. What actually happened, I clearly understood, was that all this vitality and life that he had transferred from others to himself for years was now in turn being taken from him and transferred elsewhere. One moment on the edge, he wobbled horribly. Then with that queer sideways motion, he stepped forward into the middle of the patch and fell heavily upon his face. Again, I thought of a troop of small black horses galloping away down a subterranean passage beneath my feet, plunging into the depths, their tramping growing fainter and fainter into buried distance. In my nostrils was a pungent smell of earth. And then, all passed. I came back into myself. Mr. Freen Jr. was lifting his brother's head from the lawn where he had fallen from the heat, close beside the tea table. He had never really moved from there. And Jamie, I learned afterwards, had been the whole time asleep upon his bed upstairs, worn out with his crying and unreasoning alarm. Gladys came running out with cold water, sponge, and towel, brandy too, all kinds of things. "Mother, it was the heat, wasn't it?" I heard her whisper. But I did not catch Mrs. Freen's reply. From her face it struck me that she was bordering on collapse herself. Then the butler followed, and they just picked him up and carried him into the house. He recovered even before the doctor came. But the queer thing to me is that I was convinced the others all had seen what I saw, only that no one said a word about it. And to this day, no one has said a word. And that was, perhaps, the most horrid part of all. From that day to this, I have scarcely heard a mention of Mr. Freen Senior. It seemed as if he dropped suddenly out of life. The papers never mentioned him. His activities ceased, as it were. Certainly he achieved nothing worth public mention. The afterlife of that empty patch of garden, however, was quite otherwise. Even before I left in the following summer, it had changed. It lay untouched, full of great, luscious, driving weeds and creepers, very strong, full-fed, and bursting, thick with life.
Algernon Blackwood's Ghost Stories, The Transfer, was abridged by Robin Brooks, read by Ruth Gemmell, and produced by Clive Brill. It was a Pacificus production for BBC Radio 4. We have another story from Blackwood next week, The Man Who Lived Backwards, about a fellow who looks back to a decision which has made him unlucky in love.
You're leaving the seventh dimension.
Well, that's it for the seventh dimension, but it will open its doors. Can a dimension have doors? I don't know. It will loosen its portal, it will lower its barriers, it will beam into your brain. All right, it'll be on the radio and or internet device next week.